In November 1948, a science fiction writer stood up in front of a room full of other science fiction writers and said something. He said, "You don't get rich writing science fiction. If you want to get rich, you start a religion." People in the room later said they thought he was joking. 2 years later, he published a book. 12 years after that, he had a navy, actual ships, actual uniforms, actual ranks, and tens of thousands of people who believed he had discovered the secret to unlocking the human mind. His name was L. Ron Hubbard, and what he built wasn't just a cult, it was something much harder to dismantle. To understand what Hubbard built, you have to understand who he was before he built it. Lafayette Ronald Hubbard, born 1911, Nebraska. He studied civil engineering at George Washington University, dropped out after 2 years. What he was genuinely good at was storytelling. In the 1930s, he wrote pulp science fiction, for a penny a word, prolific, broke. But Hubbard had a theory. The human mind wasn't just poorly understood, it was broken, and he had found the fix. In 1950, he published Dianetics, the modern science of mental health. The American Psychological Association immediately questioned his claims. Scientists called it pseudoscience. The book became a bestseller. Here's the claim at the center of it all. Hubbard said the mind has two parts: the analytical mind, rational, functional, and the reactive mind, which stores painful past experiences as what he called engrams. Those engrams, he said, were the cause of all human suffering. Every phobia, every failed relationship, every persistent failure, all of it, engrams. The solution was a process called auditing. You sit with a trained Scientology counselor. They ask you structured questions. You revisit painful memories until, according to the theory, the memory loses its emotional charge. You become what Scientology calls clear. That is the promise. Here is what the promise doesn't mention. Every word you say in an auditing session is recorded. Every fear, every secret, every trauma you've ever carried, all of it goes into a file. That file belongs to the church, not to you. Former senior members of the church, people who spent decades inside and later left, have testified in public court proceedings that this information was used to silence critics, to apply pressure, to keep people from leaving. The auditing session wasn't therapy, it was the collection mechanism. But auditing wasn't free. Nothing in Scientology is free. To reach the state of clear, by the 1970s, you would spend the equivalent of tens of thousands of dollars. And clear is not the destination, it is the entry point. Hubbard introduced something called the Bridge to Total Freedom, a graded system of ascending levels, each one more expensive than the last, each one promising greater spiritual ability. Operating Thetan levels, OT1 through OT8. If you've watched parts 1 and 2 of this series, you already know what this structure is. You've seen it before, smaller, but identical in mechanism. Mechanism 1, Sunk Cost. Once someone has spent $10,000 on auditing, the psychological pressure to continue is enormous. Not because they've been threatened, not because they've been told to, but because stopping means the first $10,000 was wasted, and the mind will do almost anything to avoid that conclusion. So you continue. You go deeper. The investment becomes the trap. Mechanism 2, Information Asymmetry. The upper levels of Scientology contain doctrine that is withheld from new members, deliberately. You're told the advanced material is so powerful, so spiritually intense, that receiving it before you're prepared could cause serious harm. That framing serves two functions. It makes the material feel precious, and it ensures that the person who eventually receives it has already been through years of conditioning. What is the material? At the third operating Thetan level, OT3, members are told that 75 million years ago, an alien ruler brought billions of people to Earth in spacecraft, placed them around volcanoes, and detonated hydrogen bombs. The resulting souls became attached to human bodies, and they are the true source of your engrams. That information is not a secret. It entered the public legal record in 1994 during federal court proceedings in California. By the time a member reaches it, they have typically spent years inside the organization, years of community, years of language, years of identity. The doctrine that sounds outlandish to you now won't sound outlandish to someone who arrived at it one step at a time over a decade. That's not an accident, that is architecture. Mechanism 3, Identity Replacement. Scientology has its own language, WOG, what they call people outside the church, SP, suppressive person, what they call critics, and people who leave. The bridge, auditing, ethics, clear, the reactive mind. Once you've spent years thinking and speaking in that vocabulary, your entire social and conceptual world is Scientology. Leaving doesn't mean changing your beliefs, it means losing your language, your community, your sense of who you are, and your framework for understanding reality, all at once. Most people don't leave, not because they can't, because the cost of leaving has been made larger than the cost of staying. And for those who try, there is a policy specifically designed for that moment. Scientology calls it disconnection. If you are declared a suppressive person, if you speak publicly against the church, or attempt to leave, or maintain contact with others who have, current members are required to cut all contact with you, family, spouses, children, friends of 20 years. The church describes this as a personal choice made freely by each member. Former members, in sworn testimony, in court filings, and documentary records, describe something different. They describe receiving direct instructions. Phone calls, written orders, they describe it as enforced. Now here's where Scientology separates from every case we've covered in this series. NXIVM was dismantled, Cambridge Analytica was shut down. Scientology has been doing this for 70 years, and it is legally a religion. In 1993, after a 25-year legal campaign that reportedly cost the organization over $100 million in litigation, the IRS granted the Church of Scientology full tax-exempt religious status. The terms of that agreement have never been made fully public. Former tax officials and church insiders have described it as one of the most unusual arrangements in American tax history. What that legal status means in practice, the information collected in auditing sessions, your fears, your secrets, your confessions, is protected by clergy penitent privilege in many jurisdictions. Legally protected from you. And then there is the Sea Organization. The Sea Org is Scientology's inner order. Its clergy. Founded by Hubbard in 1967 on literal ships, it operates Scientology's most senior institutions worldwide today. Members sign a contract. The contract commits them to serve for 1 billion years. That is not a metaphor, that is the contract. Former Sea Org members, in affidavits, court testimony, and investigative reporting, have described working days of 14 to 19 hours, pay of approximately $50 a week, severe restrictions on communication with people outside the organization, and for members who attempted to leave before completing their obligation, a program of manual labor, isolation, and ideological re-engagement. This is a control system taken to its terminal point. Start with a promise. Extract confessions, build an identity around the system, isolate the person from outside reference, create financial dependency, and for the most committed, transform their entire existence into the property of the institution. Scientology disputes most of what former members have described. The church characterizes these accounts as false, motivated by personal grievance, and part of a coordinated campaign against their religious freedom. That is their stated position, and they have the legal right to hold it. What is not in dispute, the psychological mechanisms we've documented in this series are present. Sunk cost escalation, confirmed in the structure of the bridge. Identity fusion, confirmed in the private vocabulary, the SP designation, the community architecture. Information control, confirmed in the tiered access system and the legal protection of session records. Enforced isolation, confirmed in the documented disconnection policy. Whether those mechanisms were intentionally engineered or simply evolved over 70 years of institutional practice, the effect is the same. In 1948, a pulp fiction writer stood up and said the fastest path to money was starting a religion. Then, he spent the rest of his life building it. And the system he built, dismissed, ridiculed, sued, investigated, documented, is still operating. The question this series has been building toward isn't whether you would have joined. The question is, at what point would you have known the difference between a system and a path? Because these systems don't show you what they are, they show you what you want to see. This series started with a question about why intelligent people are the easiest to manipulate. It ended here, in the middle of an institution that has been running those mechanisms continuously, legally, for 70 years. The next video in this series goes somewhere you won't expect, because the most effective version of what you just watched, the one that reaches the most people, extracts the most money, and operates with almost zero legal scrutiny, isn't a cult at all. It's an industry, and you've almost certainly already paid into it.